6-year-old boy who shot the teacher earlier this year. I'm like, well, why? How? Like, why? It doesn't even, unless it's something like that. Oftentimes, there's sensationalism, and mainstream media won't talk about it. But I want to make sure that it stays at the forefront because this is an ongoing thing. Teachers are under constant threat and violence, and that needs to be addressed. The people's voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the people's voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the people's voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken the time out to listen. We understand that you can be utilizing your time to do something else today, so it is greatly appreciated. And welcome to all of those who are listening to the podcast for the first time. As always, if this information is worth sharing, we do ask that you subscribe to the podcast. We drop a new episode every Friday. Also, we put out a new video on YouTube every Friday at 3 p.m. So hit the subscribe, hit the like, share the information. We thank you in advance. Today, I want to talk about. I wanted to talk about school violence, not school violence, but not just school violence, I should say. But I want to talk about violence against teachers, and also some of the effects of that in regards to the teacher shortage that is currently occurring in the teaching profession here in the United States. And ironically, I read a story that this is not only solely based in the United States, that teacher shortages are occurring on a international basis as well. But that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about violence in the classroom, specifically against teachers. And I actually did a story about similar to this last year, where I talked about the teacher shortages and also some of the solutions that were being put in place, and which includes bringing teachers from other countries into the United States to fill the gap, so to speak. But I wanted to talk specifically, or at least to start off, about violence against teachers, or violence between teachers and students, because it is a joint situation when some of this happens. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it was because I was watching a video that was sent to me where I believe it was somewhere, don't quote me on which state it was, but in any event, it was a young lady and a teacher, happened to be a substitute teacher, and they got into some altercation because the substitute teacher took the phone from the student. Now, I didn't get the context on why the phone was taken, but in any event, it led to a encounter where the teacher and the student basically began to fight. The student demanded that she get her phone back, and once that did not occur, the teacher, the student, I should say, pushed the teacher, or the teacher, I should say, the student reached to get her phone back, and then there was an altercation that began, with literally ended up with the teacher being on top of the student after they began to fight, which is so disturbing on so many levels, that our educational system has declined to this level where teachers, not only do they no longer, in my opinion, garner the respect that teachers once did. Now, I'm not going to sit here and, say that this is a generational thing, right? I've seen even in my time, decades ago when I was in grade school, high school, I've seen, instances where verbally there were, attacks against teachers, and there was, unruly students that maybe said things against teachers, but all out brawl against a teacher or with a teacher, that I've never witnessed before. And like I said, I was sent this video, and it was kind of disturbing to see this, play out. And then, of course, I started doing research for the podcast, and as I'm going through, looking at articles and stories, of course, I realized, whoa, like this is not a one-off, right? Not saying I'm living in the dark and don't have a pulse of what is occurring, but the amount of videos that I went through where, and it was really similar situation after situation after situation. It was either a teacher giving an instruction to a student, sit down, stop talking, whatever, and then it just escalates to a full-out brawl. And so I wanted to talk today, like I said, about violence in the classroom, what's going on, some of the feedback that teachers are giving for the reasons why, and then ultimately how this is affecting the educational process, specifically in public education, because unfortunately, this is where many of these instances are occurring. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So and I'm trying to see where I want to start here. Let me start with the violence aspect of it, right? Let me start there. So I was reading an article here from the Carolina Journal, and they did a great article on the rise in student misbehavior and threats against teachers. And this came out earlier this year, but they did a great job in kind of breaking down some of the challenges that are currently going on in North Carolina. But of course, this extends throughout the country. But one of the things that they did was they quoted or they referred to, I should say, a survey that was done by the United States Department of Education, by the Institute of Education Services, or excuse me, Institute of Education Sciences. And they do an annual report called the School Pulse Panel report or survey. And in there, what it does, it kind of breaks down different aspects of the education, some of the factors or some of the scenarios or some of the issues within public education, and kind of gives a good breakdown of that. And in this survey, one of the first things that they noted was the increase in behavioral and violence incidents since the pandemic, right? Because, I made this statement to friends and colleagues during the pandemic. One of my biggest concerns was what will happen after these kids are now sent back to these classrooms, because during the pandemic, right, you got these kids at home, depending on what the structure of the home was, if they jumped on their computers to do their work, after that, they pretty much owned their day, right? And so you go a year, 12 months, 18 months, I don't know how long, I can't even remember how long the shutdown was at this point, but when I say the shutdown, I mean, sending everyone home and kids doing schoolwork from home. Anyway, you shut these kids in for 12 to 18 months. And then you say, we're back open. And now these kids have developed, you know, they've developed behavioral issues. They've developed routines that they are accustomed to, and now you're shoving all of these kids into a room and having an authoritarian figure, and this is the teacher, now giving them instructions and telling them what to do, put away your phone, do this and do that. I had, unfortunately, a great understanding that this was a recipe for disaster, right? I understand those who advocated for having kids back into the classroom. I get it, but I always thought there should have been a better process to it. What that process is, could have been hybrid for a few more months, or kind of walking certain classes in on a static basis. But I'm not in the education field. I'm not an educator, but I kind of had an understanding that that was going to create an issue. But in any event, going back to the survey. So one of the things in this survey is that, like I said, they said that after the pandemic, right, after the reopening, comparable to prior to the pandemic, they saw an increase in violence in the classroom. I'm reading here again from this article from the Carolina Journal. It says, according to the School Pulse panel, 84% of surveyed public school officials said the pandemic had negatively impacted the behavioral development of students in their schools. And in addition to that, they also say 30% reported an increase in bullying, 33% increase in physical attacks between students, and then a 36% increase in threats of physical attacks or fights between students. And that's just between the students, or some of the behavioral changes that have been noted in the students. This School Pulse panel survey goes down to it also breaks down the violence, or the increase in violence and threats that has occurred between teachers and students. And in that, and I'm reading through this as I'm talking as well, I'm reading through the data here, and one of the things that they pointed out was that there was an increase of behavior directed at teachers, and this is what I was looking for. So in this breakdown, again, they surveyed public schools. Again, this is public schools in the United States. So the teachers and staff that they surveyed, and this is through all schools, they're saying that they saw an 11% increase in student attacks against a teacher or a staff member of a school. They saw 11% increase after after COVID and after schools were reopened and things of that nature. In terms of verbal abuse against staff members and teachers, there was almost a 36% increase noted between the students and teachers. So teachers reported that they saw at least a 36% increase with students verbally attacking them, and also attacking members of the school staff. Now, again, these numbers to me are not shocking, but it does also go on to explain or to support some of the outstanding issues with the shortage of teachers in the classrooms. Now, depending on where you live in the country, everybody's experience might be different with this, but you know, I can tell you that consistently school districts around the country are having a tough time filling and retaining teachers. And matter of fact, I was reading a article here from NPR, and in this article, they noted that as of October 2022, at the start of the 22-23 school year, academic school year, 45% of U.S. public schools had at least one teacher vacancy. Now, that's literally half, right? 45% of schools had, of public schools had at least one teacher vacancy. That's a huge, huge number. And again, I firmly believe a lot of this has to do with the violence that has occurred, in addition to the low pay, in addition to, the restrictions that, many teachers face, post COVID, and also in terms of curriculum, and also being sensitive to some of the different designations for students in terms of sexuality and things of that nature. A lot of these are definitely, or combined of those things, have contributed to this, but I firmly believe violence is one of the reasons why, as well. As a matter of fact, let me play this clip from CBS 3 in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And they interviewed a teacher, and they also interviewed a former assistant principal who worked in the schools for almost 20 years, I believe. And she is now a professor at a college. But listen to what she says about the students that she now teaches, right? Students who are in college who want to get into the profession. And she talks a little bit about some of the apprehension about new teachers wanting to be in the profession. And she contributes that to some of the challenges with violence. But let's take a listen to this.
Here is having an impact on students going into the profession.
I've got students in the MAT program, the Masters of Arts of Teaching, and they're seeing this happen, and they're questioning their career choice and their major.
Data from the Virginia Department of Education shows at the beginning of the 2021 school year, there were more than 570 teacher vacancies throughout Hampton Roads.
Now, again, as I told you, those vacancies are nationwide. Now, this report, again, was from Hampton Roads. But she also goes on to say that, let me play this.
A year later, that number jumped to nearly 1,000.
So a year later, so in 2021, they saw, and this is in Hampton Roads, Virginia, they saw 573 teacher vacancies. By the October 2022, by October 2022, it was almost 1,999 vacancies. And obviously, this is post-pandemic. But again, going back to what the educator said about what she was seeing in terms of a trend in students who are in college not wanting to go back into or not wanting to go into the classrooms, it's because of the violence, as well as the other scenarios that are playing a part in that. Now, Julian Marsh, who was the educator who was speaking, and also is a professor at a local university in Virginia, as I said before, she was an assistant principal, and she left prior to COVID in 2019 because she started to see an uptick in the violence. And since COVID, it has been exacerbated greatly. So, violence is definitely playing a huge role in some of the challenges that are being felt in the education market, specifically in public school education. as a result of some of the challenges with the violence that has increased over the last few years. And that, like I said, in addition to the violence, you also have the cost of a college degree increasing, and also the stagnant wages that continue to proliferate education in this country. That's another reason for the teacher shortage. You also have, fewer teachers wanting to become teachers. I mean, fewer students wanting to become teachers because the profession doesn't have or doesn't hold the respect that it once did, because, in many cases, teachers are not seen as the leaders that they once were. And a lot of this perception has to do with not being compensated for the work that they do properly, in my opinion. And then secondly, you have, this issue with violence, right? Who wants to sit in a classroom and constantly feel that they're under threat, or have the potential to be threatened or actually engage into some physical violence? Nobody wants to endure that. And so the teacher shortage is a real thing. It is occurring. And not only is it occurring, but it's increasing even more, especially when you start dealing in specialized fields of education. So there's a huge, huge gap with math teachers and science teachers, because those are specialized categories. And again, you have an overall teacher shortage, but then in those specific categories, we have challenges as well, because there are just not enough people who are willing to take on learning and studying in those fields to become teachers, to have to potentially deal with some of these challenges that we see today. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. I really wanted to talk about the aspect of the violence and kind of point that out, because a lot of this unfortunately lives on social media, and unless it's something over the top, at least in my opinion, like with the case, I saw the case with the 6-year-old boy who shot the teacher earlier this year. I'm like, what, why, how, like, why? It doesn't even, unless it's something like that, oftentimes, there's sensationalism, and mainstream media won't talk about it. But I want to make sure that it stays at the forefront, because this is an ongoing thing. Teachers are under constant threat and violence, and that needs to be addressed. Of course, there are many people that will argue that, this is a result of taking resource officers out of the schools, and this is, there's no one there to handle and to discipline this. But, others will argue that there are not enough counselors in the schools. I mean, I read one report where it's, almost like 400 students to every one counselor, throughout the states. And, when you have that type of disparity in terms of additional support, when you're thinking about counseling, that's another aspect as well. Now, I'm not, a proponent of resource officers. I think, that walking into a building and seeing an officer there when you're coming in as a child for education, it just doesn't sit well with me. So now, what are the solutions, right? Because you guys always know I like to talk about the solutions. Solutions start, number one, at home. That's the first thing. Sending your children to school, there has to be an understanding that you're being sent there to be educated, right? This is not a place where you go knowingly to or have the ability to disrespect another adult, first of all, right? A lot of this, in my opinion, kind of goes back to some old school ethics and guidelines, right? I mean, coming up in my time, you never disrespected an adult, and you surely didn't put your hands on an adult, right? So, but to try to turn the clock back is impossible. But we have to kind of deal with the situation where we're at today. So I think a lot of this starts at home. Then additionally, a lot of this starts with support services within the school, right? Identifying some of the challenges that maybe some of these students have, addressing anger management, learning how to decelerate or how to prevent a violent reaction, or at least addressing it in another manner, kind of teaching this. They should have a course about this as well. And I know many private schools have these type of resources, but we're talking about public schools as well. And then, and I firmly believe, and this is not going to sound popular, but, for those kids that are repeat offenders, there should be some serious consequences for that, right? One of the best lessons is, through consequences. And so, there has to be a reexamination, especially for those who are repeat offenders and those who are just, and I'm talking about children that perpetrate violence against another person, student, or a teacher. So those are just some of my suggestions, but, I wanted to talk about this today. Like I said, I wanted to kind of shed light on this and kind of put this out, make sure that it stays out there. Like I said, there's been some conversations and chatter about it, but I don't think it's been consistent enough. So, hopefully this information is well received and is shared, because teachers are everything, in my opinion. So I want to make sure that they stay protected and that we continue to be able to have teachers in our school systems. It's important. So as always, if you would like to leave a comment about what I discussed today, please feel free to reach out to me on my social media. You can reach me at I am Trey Evans. That is on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also reach me at the People's Voice Podcast. The People's Voice Podcast. That's on Instagram. And you can also reach me on LinkedIn. Trey Evans on LinkedIn. And you can leave a comment and I'll follow back up. And if you have any suggestions, things I should talk about, please feel free. But in any event, as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. People's Voice.